Okay, so when talking about like debate, meta skills, very, very linked. So I'll be interested to tell you about these meta skills.
Okay, hello everyone, and that was hopefully you all enjoyed that really interesting lecture on an introduction into debate. So now we're going to be transitioning into our next event of the day, which is going to be meta skills. And today's topic on this is going to be academics. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so hello and welcome everyone. So today's panelists, we're going to have Rich, Andy, and Stephanie, and we're all going to be discussing academics today. So before we get into the actual meat of today's discussion, I first just want to draw your attention to the Q&A feature in case you guys haven't used a Zoom webinar before. So on the bottom bar of the Zoom meeting, you can see there's a little Q&A button. And in case you don't want your message to be like overridden by potential spam or other people talking in the chat, you can use the Q&A feature in order to purely ask questions, and we'll address those questions as soon as possible. So if no one has any further questions about that, let's go ahead and get into today's topic. So first, I'm sure a lot of you may be wondering what a meta skill even is. A meta skill can be defined as a broad, higher order capability that can help you to develop other skills. And meta skills can be applied across a wide variety of domains. Some key meta skills that we'll be covering throughout this event include rapid learning, efficiency, problem solving, and critical thinking. And what I mean by this is that something like critical thinking doesn't purely apply to just something like physics or algebra. Critical thinking is something that applies across almost every subject, because almost every subject requires you to be able to take in information and make a judgment based on that by the information you have. And so using valuable skills like this, we hope that you can learn things from this to apply to a lot of different aspects of your life. To give you guys a day-by-day synopsis of what today's and for the next 4 days, our event will cover. So today, we'll be covering academic excellence. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about extracurricular activities. On Sunday, we'll be talking about conducting research. And on Monday, we'll talk about contests and competitions. So to give you guys a daily structure of sort of how each day we'll be covering these skills, we'll be starting with an introduction of the day's topic. We'll basically be explaining the significance of it, why you should care about this topic in the first place, and also introduce some key discussion points. Then we'll have each of our panelists present their unique perspectives on the topic and basically share their overarching views on things and their personal takeaways. And then finally, we'll open it up to you guys and allow you guys to kind of ask any burning questions you have, and our panelists will provide valuable answers and suggestions to these questions. And let's go ahead and first meet our panelists that will be speaking today. So first, we have Rich. Rich, would you like to go ahead and quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Rich. I am a rising senior at Clements High School in Houston, or Sugar Land, Texas. Some things that I like to do are I enjoy playing tennis, I enjoy juggling, and I also enjoy like listening to EDM music, in particular, music that I think is like interesting from video games. And an interesting fact about myself is that I like to try using my left hand in addition to using my right hand, I guess. So yeah, nice to meet you all.
Great, thank you so much. Next, we have Andy. Andy, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, sure. Hey guys, I just graduated from Westwood High School and I'm an incoming freshman at MIT. I'm pretty interested in math and coding, so that's guided a lot of my choices in high school regarding like research courses and just activities. I like to play tennis, basketball, ultimate. I like to watch Christopher Nolan movies. I also juggle, yeah, and I like to drive around with friends.
Great, thank you. And finally today, we also have Stephanie. Stephanie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie. I just recently graduated from Seven Lakes High School, and I'll be studying prospectively molecular biology and government at Harvard in the fall. Some of my interests include biology and math and public health. You guys may or may not remember me from my biology and math classes in the past few years with Kid Teach Kid. So some of my outside hobbies include traveling, baking, and just going for long walks in my neighborhood. So yeah.
Nice. Okay. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into an introduction of what academic excellence really is and what we're going to be discussing today. So academics themselves can be defined as formal courses taken in school where students are ranked by the grades they earn. And this is important because it's a fundamental and universally desired part of any successful high school career. Whether you're applying, no matter what kind of level of college that you're applying to or even jobs in the future, almost everyone will look for your grades and sort of how you're compared against your peers in terms of academics, because it shows that you have a drive to learn and the capability to be dedicated to your studies, which is important. And some questions we'll be examining today include, how can I study more efficiently? What are effective strategies for preparing for standardized tests like APs and the SAT? And what are some tips for the transition into high school where every grade matters? So with that introduction done, let's go ahead and get to our panelist presentations. So first, Rich, would you like to go ahead and share your screen?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I just have a quick few slides to sort of provide the audience with some sort of visual aid in case you guys in case I'm talking too fast, or you guys just want to have a brief overview of what I'm going to be talking about. So the first thing that I want to talk a little bit about my experience with is choosing high school courses. So the main thing that entering high school differs from middle school is that when you go into high school, you have quite a bit more freedom to choose which classes you want to take. In middle school, for the most part, everybody's in the same level of math, science, and that sort of stuff. But once you get into high school, not everybody's going to be taking, say, 8th grade science. Instead, you now get to choose between biology, chemistry, physics, whatever you want to take. And for the most part, you want to try choosing courses that interest you, because it's these subjects that you'll probably be the most motivated to work on. It's these classes that you'll probably be the most motivated to pay attention. So, I mean, this is probably pretty obvious, but I know that a lot of my friends just choose random classes or choose classes that all of their friends are in. And while this is definitely something that needs to be considered, I think it's just as important that you also choose classes that align with your interests. But then on the flip side of the coin, I think there's in general two sort of things that people choose classes for. One is to increase their GPA, and the other is to choose courses that they're really interested in. And I think that finding a balance between these two things is quite important. Around the US, I'm sure that all the different high schools have different ways of calculating GPA and class rank and that sort of thing. And I know that in my school, it's one thing that's important is that if you take an AP level class or a pre-AP level class, then they'll add some extra points to your average or something. And as a result, a lot of people feel extra motivated to take all AP classes so that they can get a lot of extra points to increase their GPA. And I mean, this is perfectly fine, especially if you're taking AP classes that you genuinely enjoy participating in. But at the same time, let's say that you're not interested in music theory at all, but you decide to take AP music theory just because perhaps you need a fine art credit, but you also want it to be an AP. I probably would not recommend this, especially if you find music theory difficult and if you're not interested in it. So I think to some degree, you have to sort of understand that there's a balance between these two things. And something else that I think is pretty important is to identify which courses have prerequisites. A lot of the time, you'll be able to take certain courses far earlier than you might expect. I think the main example of this in my school is Physics C. So my school offers AP Physics 1, AP Physics 2, AP Physics C, as well as modern physics. And you might think that, oh, the order should definitely be you have to take AP Physics 1 first, then AP Physics 2, AP Physics C, and then modern physics. Because technically speaking, this is, I guess you could say the order of rising difficulty. Or not necessarily rising difficulty, but this is the order in which most people learn the information, and it probably goes 1, 2, C anyways. But if you look at the prerequisites for AP Physics C, it turns out that it's not actually required to be taking AP Physics 2 before you've taken Physics C. So there are some people who I know, including myself, who ended up going directly to AP Physics C, and we did not take AP Physics 2 because we found the AP Physics C material more interesting. And similarly, although modern physics is probably separate from the rest of these fields and in my opinion a bit harder, it's also possible to directly take modern physics starting from AP Physics 1. So this is something that you want to keep in mind. Like, just because you think that there is a relative hierarchy of classes that you have to take in some order does not necessarily mean that this hierarchy actually exists. And you should double check that, like, whether or not you can actually take certain courses before you automatically assume that you cannot. I think another example of this is, I remember that a lot of people ended up taking like world geography before world history, but it turns out that you could actually take world history before world geography because it was not a prerequisite. Some other things to keep in mind are to know your limits. Like, although it might be tempting for some people to like say take a lot of difficult classes if you're really interested in all these topics, or if you just think that you can handle it, you do need to keep in mind that like some of these classes are going to have insane workloads and other classes might be easier. So if you're taking a lot of classes that require like quite a lot of time commitments and you're aware of this, then you should know like how much you're going to be able to handle, and you want to be able to sort of plan what you're going to sort of take in high school accordingly. And yeah. Does anybody have any like particular questions that they want to ask regarding this, choosing high school courses? Oh, and actually, I think one more thing that I should probably talk about is understanding like what the course is, because every single high school is going to teach the course differently. So the most important information that you can gain about a course is like how difficult it is, like how the teachers teach, if the teacher is good, whether or not the workload is really bad. And the best way to find this out is by talking to people who have taken the course in a previous year. And although a lot of the times maybe you might be like, oh, but I don't know anybody who took a course in this previous year, I think it's really important that you just sort of reach out to anybody who you know has taken the course. It doesn't have to be somebody you know well, but most of the time people are like perfectly willing to advise someone who reaches out to them asking how a course was. So for example, maybe you're thinking about whether you want to take like AP biology or something like that, but you're not sure if you're going to be able to handle the workload. Even if you don't know anybody who's taking AP biology this year, it's perfectly fine to like just go up to somebody who you know has taken AP biology, even if you don't know them that well, and be like, hey, so I'm thinking of taking AP biology next year, and I just wanted to know what your thoughts are, like how hard the workload is, whether or not you would recommend to take this course. And a lot of the times, like somebody's advice who's already taken the course is going to be extremely helpful. So I have a question in the Q&A that says, can I give an example of 1 to 2 examples of a high workload class? So I think for this obviously differs from school to school. For my school, one of them is definitely like Spanish 5. I remember that I was thinking about taking AP Spanish 5, but I ended up not taking it because I asked people and they ended up telling me that like there was a really bad workload, and I wasn't sure if this was something that I wanted to do, especially in my junior year, because I felt like my junior year was a time where I was going to have a lot of stuff and I didn't want to really overload myself by having to take AP Spanish, Spanish 5 as well. Someone asks, is it a big jump from AP Physics 1 to AP Physics C? In my opinion, the main jump here is that AP Physics C takes AP Physics 1 material and requires you to apply calculus to it. Like a co-requisite for AP Physics C is AP Calc. So what this means is you have to be taking calculus at the same time as you're taking AP Physics C. So AP Physics C is split into 2 semesters, mechanics, or 2 like subtopics, mechanics and magnetics and electricity. So the mechanics section, in my opinion, is mainly just AP Physics 1 material, except it is slightly harder and also you're applying calculus. So in my opinion, if you think that you can handle the fact that calculus will now be being applied in all of these AP Physics 1 concepts, then the jump should be handleable for sure. But yeah. And I do know people that like took calculus and also took AP Physics C at the same time. So in my opinion, it's definitely doable to do the jump from AP Physics 1 to AP Physics C. I see someone else asking about credit by exams. So what a credit by exam is a credit by, oh yeah, so for people who don't know, in Texas, we have this thing called a credit by exam, which allows you to sort of skip taking a class. And in my opinion, if you want to like get to a higher class, then this is definitely like get to like a higher level class because you think that it would be more interesting. And this is definitely something that you can do. Like, for example, I wanted to learn like more advanced math, I guess. So I took the credit by exam for 6th grade and 7th grade math. So I think if you want to like if you're really interested in like some topic and you can take a credit by exam to get there, then it's definitely worth it to take that. Okay. And I think I'll go on to the next thing. So, I mean, this is just sort of a general thing, but something else that comes with going into high school is having to come up with new sorts of topic, like learning new ways to study, I guess, especially because for a lot of people, the workload in high school can be quite a bit more than the workload in middle school. So there are just a few really short main topics that I want to get through. So the first one is to know what works best for you. This sounds really simple, but just know that just because all of your friends might study well by cramming the night before does not mean that you should also cram the night before. So just a general topic. And one other thing that I really want to sort of mention is being able to create study materials with friends, because you don't have to create all of your study materials yourself, because this can be especially time consuming. So if you have like a lot of friends who are taking the same class, then one thing that can be especially helpful is, for example, if you guys need to like memorize a bunch of definitions and you guys want to use flashcards, then instead of each one of you guys each creating your own set of flashcards, which will definitely waste a lot of your time, you guys can all come together. Each of you spends 10 minutes creating 10 flashcards, and then you combine all of your flashcards together, which saves each of you a lot of time, but still creates the same quality flashcards. So something like that can definitely help. Although one thing I will warn is that like, especially in subjects where you need to like deeply understand something, sometimes like using your friend's study material can be a bit not good. Like I remember for biology, I always found it more helpful to create my own study flashcards as opposed to like collaborating with others, because sometimes, and this is just primarily because I felt like I understood my own definitions of the terms far better than if I like wrote the flashcard than if I try to study someone else's flashcard, in which it might be difficult for me to like understand what they're saying. So studying with friends can definitely save you some time if you guys are creating materials together, but yeah. Someone asks, can we take a prerequisite course along with the class? This is not something that I believe is possible, at least not where I am. In order to take like a course along with a class, it has to be like a co-requisite. And then someone else asks, if you don't take the first level of a class and go to a higher level without a required prerequisite, wouldn't it be hard because you don't know the basic content? Yes, and this is why if there's a prerequisite, it is generally required that you take the prerequisite before actually taking the class. Like, for example, a prerequisite to AP Physics C is AP Physics 1. So you can't actually take AP Physics C without having already taken AP Physics 1. So that's why the prerequisites are there. And as far as I know, it is not possible to get around this. Okay, and I think I'll go on to my last and final slide. So the last thing I wanted to quickly talk about is the SAT. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody has heard of the SAT. It's like this infamous sort of big test that a lot of people, including me, are definitely afraid of, where it tests you on your ability to just sort of go through English passages and do some math problems. And you receive a score out of 1600. So due to recent events, I believe that the SAT might like no longer be required in certain college applications. So perhaps this won't be as relevant, but for those of you who still want to take the SAT, I'll just give a few things that definitely helped me in my experience in taking the SAT. So one thing that I feel like blocks a lot of people from actually improving is that they believe that the SAT like measures how skilled they are at doing English or math. And because it measures like how skilled they are, they think that they can't improve. But this is definitely not true, because the SAT has a lot of patterns that show up repeatedly. And if you can like understand these patterns, understand the types of questions that show up, then you can always like, you definitely have a chance to increase your score. So don't think that, oh, just because I might struggle sometimes in my English class means that you're definitely going to like not do well on the English section of the SAT. And for me, the resource that I used the most that greatly helped me was Khan Academy. And I'm sure that there are other resources out there, like I know there's books and stuff, but Khan Academy is just the one that I found to be very helpful. So, so if you go to Khan Academy here on this website, you can see that going to Khan Academy and then courses, if you go to test prep down here, you can see that they have an SAT section. And this has quite a lot of information that is very helpful. They have like, here you can go practice, and they've in the practice section, they've effectively broken down topics from every single area. So here's like all the reading topics that you can practice, writing topics, more grammar topics that they give you lots of practice on. And this is all super helpful. And of course, they also have 10 practice tests, and you can take all of these and just see which areas you struggle on. And I believe Khan Academy also has a sort of like code that checks which areas you're strong at and which areas you're weak at. So this is definitely something else that's helpful. So remember, going to Khan Academy courses, SAT, test prep is definitely helpful. And one last thing is that know that you can, for knowing how reporting scores for the SAT work, just know that you can report scores. Just know that like you can take the SAT multiple times, and most of the time the colleges will only look at your highest score. So don't be worried about like, oh, if I take the SAT now and I get like a really bad grade, then I'm stuck with this SAT score for the rest of my life. Because this is false. You can take the SAT multiple times and they will only check your highest score most of the time. So don't worry about this. And someone asks, can you do any AP courses outside of school? Yes, this is possible. From where I go, you can either take summer classes at my school directly, or you can talk to the counselors about taking online classes on online platforms. Does it cost extra money to retake the SAT? Unfortunately, yes, you have to repay every single time you retake the SAT. Do outside SAT preparation academies help? I personally cannot attest to whether these are helpful or not because I did not go to any of these. I do know that a lot of my friends went to like a program called Test Masters, which they told me helped them, but personally, I cannot say anything about this. Is the first SAT that you take free? I don't actually know. I know that for my school at least, they offer a few in-school SATs, and these in-school SATs are free for everybody. I don't know if the first SAT you take is free. And what is the difference between the SAT and ACT and which one is preferred? I don't actually know that much about the ACT, so I can't comment too much on this. But I will say that, I mean, some people find the SAT easier, some people find the ACT easier. And I guess you'll just have to find out which one is which. Yeah, I don't have too much experience, and I don't know that much about the ACT, so I can't give a very good opinion on this. And yeah, thank you so much to everybody for listening.
Thanks so much, Rich. That was definitely really insightful. Andy, would you like to go ahead and give your side of the, like what you think about academics?
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen. One sec. Stephanie, do you want to go before me? There's like a system preferences thing I have to change.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Hold on. Okay. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. Can everyone see? Okay, so hey everyone, I'm just going to be giving a few points about, my first point is going to be about grades and classes, and then I'm going to talk about standardized testing, and then I'm going to talk about like some study strategies that I've gathered throughout the past few years. Okay, so for each one of these points, these are just all my opinion, things that have helped me as I've worked through high school, so feel free to disagree, but these are just some of the tips and advice that I have. Okay, so my first tip is to keep a consistent daily schedule as to when you work on your homework, when you do your extracurricular activities. You don't have to have like a strict minute by minute schedule. That's totally unnecessary, but just having an overall sort of workflow. So for example, getting home, doing your homework, dinner, and then you're working on XYZ, just having sort of that basic overview so that every day you come home, you get into that flow of things and you're more like just more stable with what you do in your daily routine. I think that's a good idea in keeping you accountable for doing your homework. So for example, like that leads me to the next point, which is to have a balance between schoolwork and extracurriculars. So usually like students who are high achieving, they are involved in several extracurricular activities. So it's important to have a balance between working on your homework, working on studying for tests, etc., but also not neglecting your extracurriculars. But then also making sure you don't neglect your schoolwork for your extracurriculars. I believe like the most important thing is schoolwork though, and extracurriculars are sort of secondary to that, but it's still better to be able to balance the two and not to take one too much at the expense of the other. And do try to take every single test seriously. Don't try to wing any test, especially if you have time to study, because sometimes tests do make a big difference in making or breaking your grade. And especially in high school, if you have like a 100-point GPA system, which personally my school didn't, but I know like lots of schools like Clements will actually have like a 100-point system so that every single test that you take does matter. Especially for those sort of schools, you do want to take every single test seriously. But then also leading to my next point is getting a single bad test grade is definitely not the end of the world. Like you don't need to freak out. There are usually lots of extra credit opportunities or opportunities for you to make up your grade. So it's okay if like there's one test that you take, which you expected to do well, but then you just ended up flopping. It's okay. Like don't freak out too much. The worst thing that'll happen is that you'll do bad in that class. But it's just one class. Like it won't ruin your whole career. Don't worry about it. Okay, and then another thing that I really can't stress enough is that you should not be afraid to ask your teachers for clarification or ask them questions before, after, during class. That's what their job is. Their job is to make sure that you understand the material. You don't want to be intimidated by them. Usually, like teachers are very, very happy when students ask them questions. So the reason is because it shows that you're proactive, that you're engaged in the classroom curriculum, and also that you're like actively paying attention. But not only that, it makes sure that the teacher remembers who you are. So especially if you go to a large public school, like for me, Seven Lakes has like 4,000 students. Teachers have like 200 students each for one of their classes. You want to make sure that you stand out to them. And you want to do that because in the future, it's good to have good relationships with teachers because they can be like people you keep in touch with even after you graduate, who can offer like lots of guidance, feedback, opportunities. But also on top of that, like as you get into your college applications, teachers do have to write recommendation letters for you. And if they know who you are, they have a good solid grasp of your interests, and they know that you're a proactive student who asks a lot of questions, is engaged in the classroom, then they're likely to write good stuff about you, which is always a good thing. And then also Rich touched upon this when he was talking about classes, but don't be afraid to reach out to upperclassmen to get the inside scoop on the classes that you want to take. So for example, my school, there are a few classes that are very well known to be just complete brutal classes, like APUSH, AP World History. So you want to know these things, like you want to know which classes to avoid or which classes to take over the summer or take online, just which classes will really be a headache for you. This way you can sort of make precautions against taking that class or taking it some other way, because there's usually like ways to not take a certain class at school. And if you know upperclassmen who tell you these things about these classes, then you can sort of take advantage of that and make sure that you circumvent those situations. So, but then you also want to ask upperclassmen which classes are really enriching, which classes are good. So an example, well, for me, for example, AP Stats was a class that I really enjoyed, and upperclassmen told me that it was a really important class. It was helpful for them, not only just for their GPAs, but also for their knowledge in the real world. So I took that class and I really enjoyed it. So just learning which classes are good for you versus which classes are a complete nightmare, that's a good idea to do, especially if you're an underclassman. Okay, any questions about grades and classes? Okay, so I see one person asked, how do you manage the time to balance hard classes with heavy workload and extracurriculars? So that's a really good question. I do this in a few ways. There are a few like time management tricks / just tips that I have. I have a really thorough calendar. Like I have a calendar on what sort of activities that I have every day, what I need to do every day. But then on top of that, I also have a to-do list for every day. So just this way I can finish doing all the things that I need to do before I sort of slack off and do other things. So just keeping in mind what you need to do, staying very organized is key in my opinion. So yeah, just I think your organization skills are really important, but then also, like I said earlier, having that routine, that daily schedule, being consistent is a good way to manage your time. Okay, let me see. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay, so standardized testing. So obviously standardized testing is not fun. No one really enjoys it, but most of us have to do it anyways. So the SATs, I only took the SAT, I didn't take the ACT. So sometimes people take both. You can take one or the other. I would recommend just taking a practice test for each and seeing which one better suits you. I know some people just prefer the SAT because they like the SAT style of questions, or they're just better at the format, managing the format. Versus for the ACT, some people like that because it offers more leeway to like make mistakes. But basically for the SAT, I think it's definitely something that you can get better at if you study more. It's not like sort of innate. You can definitely get better at it if you put in the effort. So in my opinion, you don't need to invest too much in the SAT. You don't need to buy like fancy workbooks or anything. In my opinion, the best resource that is out there for the SAT is Khan Academy, because it's free. It tailors the practice tests to your needs. And also there's like plenty of questions on there that you can use. And I would always recommend doing practice tests under timed conditions, because time is a big factor in doing well on the SAT. SAT is pretty intensive time-wise, especially in the reading sections, in my opinion. So making sure that you're always keeping yourself to that time circumstance, and then making sure that you can adjust and to go faster, slower as necessary. That's really important to simulating the real testing situation. And then another thing is figuring out your weaknesses and focusing on them. You don't want to waste time on stuff that you're already mastered. So for example, like for me, the math section, I didn't need that much help with. It was mostly the reading and writing sections that I needed to focus on. So I just spent most of my time on those sections. So this way I know where to improve, and that I wasn't like wasting time doing something that I already knew how to do, basically. Okay, and then for APs, I think the best way to do well on the AP exam is to just not BS the class. Just taking the class seriously, doing the homework, doing the classwork, memorizing stuff along the way throughout the year, just knowing your information and taking the class very seriously is honestly the best way to study for the exam. But that being said, though, always leaving at least 2 to 3 weeks before the exam for studying, not cramming the night before, not pulling an all-nighter. That's not a good idea. Always leaving at least 2 or 3 weeks where you can go through all of the material and just revisit everything, especially if it's a class you took over the summer. If it's a class you took over the summer, I would recommend definitely at least 3 weeks to go over everything, making sure that you know what's going to be tested, reviewing all the information. I think getting one of those like Princeton Review or Barron's books helps a lot, especially like if you're reviewing last minute. Okay, let me see if there are any questions. Okay, so are there any courses or tests to make up or get back credits over the summer at the end of the school year? So usually, at least this is what happens at my school. We have something called a virtual school where you can take these classes online, and they offer these online classes during the school year or over the summer. So you can take it over the summer or you can take it over the school year, and then you get the same amount of credit as if you just took it in person in class. So I don't think there's necessarily like a makeup to do for that. Is there a difference between the SAT and ACT in college? Well, no, not really. As long as you do, like, colleges don't prefer one or the other. It's just mostly a preference based on what you're better at doing, which one you prefer. I heard the AP Bio class is very tough. Can you share some tips to making learning of biology a little easier? So I think the class can depend from teacher to teacher or from school to school. At my school, AP Bio doesn't have like the toughest reputation. But I think for biology in particular, a good way to study is to rationalize the material rather than memorize. I think this goes for like pretty much all STEM and math courses, especially like trying to understand the like how the process works rather than memorizing step by step. So relying more on logic than memory, I think that's a good way to master the concepts and make your learning of the material more reliable. And then just some more technical things, I would recommend watching, like going on Khan Academy, watching videos if you feel like the teacher didn't explain it as clearly as you wanted. Khan Academy is really good with their AP Bio curriculum. You can also try reading textbooks outside of class. I know a really good one for biology is Campbell's. That one covers everything very, very holistically, and it's probably the best biology textbook out there. But then also in general, I would recommend talking, like, you know, asking the teacher for help if you really don't understand the concept, learning together with your friends, because I'm sure a lot of your friends are also taking the same class as you. Okay, and then do you have to take an AP test for every AP class you take? No, you do not. Your AP tests are optional. However, they're highly recommended usually. They can a lot of the times give you college credit. So for example, if you take a certain AP class and you get like a 3, 4, or 5, a lot of colleges will accept that AP credit. And so you don't have to take that class in your freshman year anymore. You can just move on to higher classes. And this is good for like getting ahead in college. And then if you happen to fail an AP class, would the teacher drop you out and you would be pushed in taking a regular course class? Well, this depends from school to school. I think if you fail an AP class, you may be automatically dropped, but that's the policy for my school. I'm not too sure, to be honest. So just check with your counselor on that because it differs. What is an AVID class? I'm not too sure, actually. Can you take an AP class or AP test without taking its class? Yes, you can. You can take the AP test without taking the class. I know like some students will self-study for a class, especially if their school doesn't offer the actual class, they'll just take it by themselves. What class do you think is the hardest at Seven Lakes? It depends. I think APUSH has a pretty bad reputation at Seven Lakes, as in like how hard it is. I never actually took the class at Seven Lakes. I took it online, but out of all the classes that I took, I think AP World History was pretty hard for me just because I'm not like a history person. I think AP Calculus BC has a pretty tough reputation at Seven Lakes. So it sort of depends on what your strengths and weaknesses are. Are gifted courses higher level than AP? This also differs from school to school, but usually AP classes are like the highest level of classes. And what is APUSH? APUSH is AP US History. Yeah. Okay, and let me know if there are any other questions. If not, I'm going to move on to my final slide, which is, oh, okay, I see some in the chat. So what is the difference between the SAT and the ACT? So mostly it's just format. SAT has 3 sections. There's the reading, English, and math sections. So, and the SAT is scored out of 1600 versus the ACT is scored out of 36. And it's like an average of your score on 4 sections. So it's English, reading, math, and science. So you get scored out of 36 for each one of those 4 sections. And then your final score is the average of those 4 scores. So that's like mainly the difference. There's not really a preference among colleges, but it's mostly like which one you prefer. Does anyone know how hard AP Stats is over the summer? Again, it really differs from school to school. A lot of times, like it'll be easy in one school and hard for another school. But in my school, no one really takes AP Stats online. It's offered in person. And so usually people take it over the school year. I think it's a very rewarding class. It can have like a tough reputation sometimes, but I think it's definitely worth it to take AP Stats. Can you retake the AP final exam if you do bad on it the first time? If so, will all the attempts of doing the AP final exam go to your high school transcript record that colleges can see? Okay, so I think when you say AP final exam, you just mean the AP exam. You can retake the AP exam. You can, it's really, the APs are actually pretty like flexible. They're pretty forgiving. If you do really bad on an AP exam, you can cancel the exam. So you can just cancel it, pretend you never took it. That you can do that. However, it does cost a lot of money to take the AP exam. So it's good to just do well the first time. But if you just do really bad, you can definitely cancel it and retake the next year. So it won't go, and none of your AP scores go on your high school transcript. And you can choose which scores you report to colleges. So if you do really bad on an exam, you don't even need to cancel it, to be honest. You can just send whichever scores that you want to send to the colleges. So what I mean by like flexible is there's a lot of leeway when it comes to AP exams. And what do you consider as a good score for the SAT? For the ACT, it really depends on what college you're aiming for. So usually for like Ivy League schools, HYPSM schools, you want to aim for above a 1500 for the SAT and above a 34-ish on the ACT. But it really depends on what sort of school you're going for. Okay. I see another question in the chat. How rare is it to get perfect scores on the SAT? I'm not sure, to be honest, but it's definitely not a requirement. You don't need to get a perfect score on the SAT at all to be like, to get your foot in the door or anything. All right, if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to move on to studying, which is my final slide. If you still have any other questions, just feel free to pop them in the Q&A or the chat. I'll answer them along the way. Okay, so study tips. I think these are pretty underrated. Like generally in high school, you do want to make sure you master some good study tips because they help you in all your classes and they can save you a lot of time if you have good study strategies. Okay, so my first tip would be to figure out the study strategy that works best for you. What I mean by this is, are you more of like a visual learner? Are you more of like an auditory learner? Are you more of like someone who learns when they take notes? So you want to figure out what like sticks with you and then stick with that strategy so that you maximize your efficiency and your productivity. And another tip that I have is to take breaks. You don't want to just sit there, cram for like 5 hours at once. Your efficiency in studying decreases after a peak of like after 30 minutes or so. So you want to make sure that you're not burning yourself out by stretching yourself out too thin when you're studying. I would recommend taking a break like once every hour or so and coming back, recuperating, making sure that your brain is like focused when you're studying, because you don't want to study when you're like just super tired or you're distracted or anything. And speaking of distractions, this is something that I do personally, is keeping my phone away from me when I'm studying. So maybe putting it in a different room, putting it somewhere else where you can't see it. This way you aren't distracted by like messages or just your phone in general. And then also, like if you have distracting websites going on your computer, one thing that I used to do was use a website blocker. So for example, websites like YouTube, like Facebook, those like sort of distracting websites that suck up a lot of your time. And if you're easily distracted, especially, I think a website blocker is something that you could invest in. And then before studying, having a plan for what you want to study and how much time you're going to spend on it. So you want to have like some sort of focus on what you want to do. You don't just want to like walk in blindly and just say, I'm going to study. You want to know like what your goals are, what material you want to cover, and then possibly even making like a checklist of what you want to review and checking things off as you go. I think that way it makes your studying a lot more efficient and that you have just a better time while you're studying. You have like a clear purpose to what you're doing. Okay, I think that was it for my study my study tips. Let me know if you have any other questions. Okay, I see one. What classes would you recommend for Seven Lakes? That's a very broad question because it really depends on what grade you're in. But I would say like some classes that you take those classes that you take should also sort of center around your interests. So for Seven Lakes, I'm sort of definitely more of a STEM person. So I took like a lot of STEM classes. I took pretty much every single STEM class offered at Seven Lakes. Some of my favorite were AP Stats, AP Comp Sci. That one usually is taken in freshman year, but yeah, and then also AP Calc. I think those are all really good classes. And then honestly, AP Chem too. That one can be a little bit difficult for some people, but I think it's a really fun class. So just depends on what your interests are. You can ask your peers and see what they're taking. Usually people take about the same classes. but also asking upperclassmen. So it really depends on what grade you're in. But yeah, the classes that I listed were some of my favorites. And let's see, any recommendations to improve writing for a STEM student? Okay, yes. So I also wanted to touch on this. I forgot to mention, like when someone asked me what the hardest class at Seven Lakes was, I totally forgot, but AP Lang and AP Lit are killers too. They can be pretty hard. And most people struggle to get an A in those classes. So I think for those classes, definitely like staying up to date with current events is really helpful, because a lot of the times when you're writing, you need evidence to back up your claim, and then using like a current event can be a good idea for that. And also improving writing in general. I think one thing that helped me was just reading a lot of books. Reading, like, doesn't need to be books, can be like articles online, scientific writings if you're interested in that, but just reading like technical writing to increase your vocabulary and just increase like the smoothness of your writing. It really helps a lot. And what is the most effective way to improve on the reading section of the SAT? I think what really helped me, and it sounds really like basic, but just doing a lot of questions really helped me. Just going through the Khan Academy practice questions, just really spamming those questions and figuring out what strategy works best for you. So I know like there are a few different ways that people approach the reading section. Some people will read the passage and then do the questions. Some people will read the questions, then read the passage, then do the questions. Some people will just skim the passage, don't read at all, then just use the question to help them read through the passage. So there's different ways that people do it. So try taking a few reading passages and seeing which one works best for you and just sticking with that. Usually that is a good way to improve your score, improve the ability for you to take those like tests, because the reading section is usually was the hardest section for me too. Any technical writing, what technical writing do you suggest to read? Honestly, whatever interests you the most. If you're interested in a particular subject, I would suggest maybe going on websites like news articles, or I know there's science magazines out there, just anything that's high quality writing, reading that a lot, and then learning about how the author, just sort of internalizing how the author worded certain things. I think that's a good way to help improve your own writing. How many AP classes should you take per year? Well, this depends on what grade you're in. And it also depends on what workload you can handle. And it also differs from person to person. And it also differs on your school's culture. For my school, Seven Lakes has a very intense taking AP class culture, because the way our GPA is calculated is pretty much based on how many AP classes you take. So a lot of people take a bunch of APs. I know the years that you take the most APs are definitely going to be your junior and senior years. A lot of my friends at Seven Lakes, we took 6 or 7 APs in junior year. That's totally not necessary, but it depends on the school culture. And then some schools won't even let freshmen take APs. So it just depends on what your circumstances are. So but if you can handle an AP class, I would suggest you just go for it, because you do learn a lot and you have the possibility of getting college credit. Let's see. So easiest way to get scholarships later on in college. I think we may have another meta class for this. And I think I am running out of time, so I'm just going to go ahead and let Andy talk. He should be able to answer your questions.
Okay, sorry about that earlier. I'm using a new computer. So I'm just gonna, since we only have 10 minutes left, I'll just go over the things that I thought, I agree on pretty much everything Rich and Stephanie said. They had a lot of really helpful advice and insight. So just to give a bit of background into my own situation, I'm an IB student at Westwood High School, which is a fairly competitive public high school in Austin, Texas. Generally, my focus was on math and STEM. So like Stephanie and Rich, I took a lot of STEM classes for my electives. We had a set of core classes that we need for the state. And alongside that, we have elective classes. So some of them are sports, other core classes that you can take if you want. And there's other programs like debate or like fine arts classes that you can do too. School clubs, I did some honor societies and comp sci club and the math club. So this isn't too important, but this is just some insight into like my own background in case that helps you give like perspective for the upcoming things. So as far as choosing high school courses goes, this is like the big thing. My main advice is trust your curiosity and choose courses that interest you, because in high school you have a lot more time to take classes, I think, or you have a lot more variety than middle school. And this is one of your like last chances to actually take classes without the like pressure of overloading yourself. Like in college, you can only take, for example, at certain universities, 5 or 6 or even less than that. And if you take more than that, you're just going to stress yourself out too much. My general advice is to take the most challenging courses available that's within your own capabilities. Because if you take these classes, first of all, your teachers are generally better teachers. They know the content usually better. They can help you answer questions. They have better lectures and etc. But at the same time, you're also surrounded by more ambitious peers. This gives rise to like friendly competition, hopefully not toxic competition, but it also just helps you learn alongside other people who have the same ambition as you and who can help you out with like studying or other things. So GPA, of course, still matters, even though a lot of the time it is an inherently toxic system for some schools. So at my school, we have weighted and unweighted GPAs. Unweighted GPAs, just you have to like get a 90 plus. Weighted GPAs are like IB and AP classes, and maybe for your school like gifted classes. So for these, make sure you take several of them to show, if you're like worried about colleges, to show that you're actually challenging yourself. But don't overload yourself, because if you get a bad GPA, that's worse. I'd say like, yeah, don't take too many classes, because time is still an issue if you're considering like extracurriculars alongside your schoolwork. So the next thing is, of course, still be proactive about carving out an academic path. So even though you don't have too much time, you want to still develop your interest in a certain category or certain categories that you think you have passions in. So make sure to take courses early. Consider doing credits at like local colleges, so you could take like courses over the summer or test out of things. And then, of course, learn from your upperclassmen and become friends with them, because they really do want to help you along your journey, because they went through it too. Studying is pretty simple. I mean, you have to spend the time. Like I think Rich or Stephanie said, you can't just wing your test. So yeah, definitely spend the time. Cut out any distractions you have at home if you don't have enough time. And I would say the big thing for a lot of us is to avoid procrastination. And this comes down to 2 things. So first, procrastination is a habit. It's a bad habit. And to break a habit, you just have to have like the right mindset and literally tell yourself, okay, I can't procrastinate. And to a certain extent, that actually helps you stop procrastinating. Even though it seems like you're not doing much, you're just telling yourself things. It does help, because it reinforces like your psychology things. The other thing is, as long as you have like ambition, and if you have things that you want to do with your time that you wouldn't have if you procrastinate, then that's another way to like get out of procrastination. So for example, if you're really interested, or if you like want to develop an interest in cooking, for example, but you keep procrastinating, then if you have this desire to do other things, then you have more motivation to like do work earlier and then save time for your other activities. So first is simply breaking the habit, and second is finding other passions. For the SAT and ACT, I think Arjun and Stephanie basically covered it. For the SAT, I think it's really helpful to do practice tests in the same way that you might prepare for competitions. So this like test booklet is pretty helpful. Khan Academy is also very helpful if you're looking for specific topics or like specific question types that you want to work on. As far as the difference between SAT and ACT goes, I think ACT goes a bit faster. You have like a bit less time per question, but it's basically insignificant at that point. It's really just a question of like personal preference. Okay, I'll go to the Q&A questions real quick. For an Ivy League, is it required or recommended to take all APs? I think Ivy Leagues really look heavily upon like whether or not you're challenging yourself. And if like your school offers a lot of APs and you're taking them, then it shows that you've looked at what your school offers and chosen like challenging courses. And it also just shows that like you've spent a lot of time on school and you actually care about it. So even though it's not required because many schools don't have that many AP classes, I think if your school doesn't have them, then it's very highly recommended. Is it better to go to private high schools? Does it help increase your chances of getting into good, prestigious colleges or universities? I don't actually know too much about this. I go to public school. I think all of us go to public schools here. Though I do know sometimes private schools are more relaxed on certain like requirements, like core requirements. So if private schools help, if they have a structure set in place that helps like your particular interest, maybe it's like liberal arts, then maybe in that case, you could like develop that interest more and become more skilled in the things that you're already skilled in. So maybe that would help like improve yourself as a candidate to colleges. But in general, I think really both are really great ways to go. Sorry, that didn't really answer, but I'd say both. Either is fine. What classes do you recommend to get into prestigious universities and even maybe even get a scholarship? We probably will talk about this later on too. I'd say scholarships also look upon like your they might ask questions like have essay questions. So a lot of the time you have to send a transcript to them and maybe talk about like what like tests you've done, like maybe send in scores. I don't think they look too specifically at like what classes you're currently taking though. They may look at your extracurriculars more than your classes. In the chat, how is the GPA counted in high school? And I'm in middle school, so yeah. So GPA, it really depends on across all different high schools. I know some high schools like give extra weight to APs. So a lot of people in that case have to like, or I guess a bit pressured to take more APs. At my school, it's like there's two different types of GPAs. One is unweighted and one's weighted. So unweighted is calculated across like all your classes, and it's a 4.0 scale. And then weighted means that like only your weighted classes, which are generally core classes, like STEM electives, like your language classes, those things, like the more academic ones are counted towards that weighted GPA. And it's GPAs like for our school, it's we have a 0 to 100 scale. So we just take the average of these grades and then convert it to like a number from 0 to 6.0, if that's what you're wondering. Your SAT score goes on your permanent record. Yeah, so you can set like decide which SAT scores you want to send to colleges. So it doesn't really go on your high school transcript. It like colleges will ask for it separately. Yeah, so I think our next session tomorrow is going to be talking about extracurricular activities, so we can answer or talk about this a bit more next time. Yeah. And does the PSAT matter? For the National Merit Scholarship, you have to get like reach a certain threshold for the PSAT. So I guess in that sense it would matter. But also it's kind of like the SAT, and then it shows your academic proficiency. So I think practicing for both the SAT will definitely prepare you for the PSAT too. So you don't have to like practice for it specifically. All right, I think we're a minute over. Rich or Sage, do you think we should keep going? I have like 2 more slides.
I think you can go ahead and just like kind of give a brief summary if you have any like last things that you think would be important to mention.
Yeah, so I think the main thing I wanted to touch was keeping perspective. So a lot of the time we're emphasizing being a good student, knowing like how to push ourselves. But I think a lot of it starts with being a good person. So just a few tips in high school. Be kind to your teachers, because they're taking on a position that like means a lot, requires a lot of sacrifice. If you're kinder to them, they also treat you more kindly, if that's the way you want to see it. So yeah, and a lot of teachers become lifelong friends, as Steph said. Try to avoid toxic competition. I know this happens often when you have like grade inflation, or when like there's a certain like meta for choosing classes. But try not to like undermine classmates. Definitely don't cheat. Avoid like obsessiveness, like in contrast to actual passion. So don't obsess over like 1 or 2 points on every test, even though it may, like, if it matters a lot, maybe do it, like, don't obsess over on like a homework grade, for example. The last thing is like judge others based on like how they are as people, and not on like academic performance. This is just like, yeah. Anyways, I think I mentioned the other things. Just believe in yourself. And set clear and achievable goals. So that way, even like this gives you, like if it's achievable, then you definitely like have more potential to give out like set a path, and it makes high school like much more enjoyable. If you set too high of goals, then high school is probably not going to be super enjoyable. Yeah. All right, I think that's it for me.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Andy. That was definitely really useful and a lot of good things to keep in mind. So before we end off, I just want to give you guys just a few extra resources, just for general things that Teach Kid does have to offer. So just really quickly, we do have our course library available. So if you ever need to reference other things from previous courses that we've taught, you can find all of that in our course library at kidteachkid.org/all-courses. So all of that is available here. And we know that you guys had a lot of questions today, and I'm sure that there are definitely more questions that will come. So because we unfortunately don't have enough time to answer all of them, if you have these additional questions, then please feel free to submit them using this link right here, kidteachkid.org/class-questions. And here you can submit any sort of follow-up questions that you may have, and just fill in this information, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So other than that, thank you guys all so much for coming. Thank you to our amazing panelists today, and please join us again tomorrow where we'll be covering extracurriculars. Thank you guys.